traditional in its approach to education, training, and disciplinary identities. So I'm going to make 3 points quickly so that we have time for questions. The first, that AKU overwhelmingly is a health science-based institution, and it's a health science model that is very, very heavily Western. And as a Western model of health, it predominantly embraces the notion that you seek out healthcare when something's wrong, that you arrive as a patient to have a remedy, and that the healthcare system treats you as an example and observation to be studied and a remedy to be proposed. And Lorne mentioned his sequence, and I'm going to show off a little bit and convince Lorne that I remembered his teachings. Sometimes proteins go goofy and they become prions. I think that's the way it works. And what I'm trying to do, Assad, through your group is to minimize the risk of the protein sliding into the prion category, because we don't really know how to deal with prions terribly well, at least at a bureaucratic level. There are alternative models. For example, there was recently a Nobel Prize in China to Tu Yu, who developed the formulary for a malaria treatment based entirely on 2,000-year-old Chinese medicine texts. And there the model is a more holistic model. And if you study in China, they will tell you that if you follow Chinese medicine, you'll live a very, very long time, and you may not know why. And if you study Western medicine, when you die, you will know exactly why you're dying. Now, that's a little bit reductionist, and it's a little bit coming out of the Chinese view of the world, but it makes an important point. So that's the first comment. The second, our training programs in the professions, medicine, nursing, it could be law, engineering, business, leave almost no room for free-spirited roaming around the academy studying different things. There have been efforts. Melbourne is probably the outstanding example of creating the baccalaureate program as an exploratory degree with licensure at the master's level, but those are very, very rare. So we track our students in a very traditional way. And at AKU, we adhere to the Western model of training for physicians and nurses, and as a result, time for innovation is very rare. In my experience in Western universities, enormous amounts of innovation come out of the arts and the sciences. Music, math, physical sciences, literature, language, all kinds of neat things come out of language training, come out of literature and society. And I think I am optimistic that with the onset of arts and science at AKU, we will see an explosion in free inquiry across the academy. And I suspect in a very short period of time, we will have medicine and nursing students clamoring to be let into the free-ranging pursuit of things that are exciting, about which you can become passionate. The third point, I hope, and I think Chapter 9 invites us to shift from a concept of health in the Western tradition to a concept of well-being. You mentioned the social determinants of health. Lauren mentioned happiness. There is an unbelievably rigorous treatment of the concept of happiness now in contemporary economics, where we have gone from income maximization to utility maximization to now happiness, quality of life maximization. And I think your Chapter 9 invites us to do that, and that to me is really very exciting. So with that, I'm getting feedback from somebody's machines, but with that, Assad, I'll turn it back to you, and look forward to probing and insightful questions from our audience. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Carl. We're going to go into questions in a bit. So just for recap, I think the comments that Carl made and the three comments, I think they're really, really important and they're very exciting to me to think through. And also, Carl, thank you for calling us prions after being skunkworks of AQU, now CCID are potential prions as well. So those are badges of honor for us. Thank you. Okay, so there's a question here from Anil Khamis. So he says, we make a distinction between innovation and incremental change and reform, change at a wider level. Given the state of the planet, environmental crisis, people disconnection from decision making and profits, inequalities between haves and have-nots, who else needs to be in such a conversation as we are having today? In terms of agnosticism, what value does this infer? So open to both of you.
Well, in typical Anil fashion, he is magnificently capable of taking one question and turning it into an exegesis on the state of humanity. So I don't know how to answer Anil's question. I'll take a run at it. Innovation is not incremental change. Innovation, if you imagine curves in a classical presentation, innovation is jumping to a new curve. We don't know where that curve goes. We don't know if it's parallel. We don't know if it's orthogonal, but it is a completely different framework within which to move forward. Who should do it? Everybody needs to be part of it. The Western academies, I think, based on the Humboldtian model of several centuries ago, as a great risk by virtue of enshrining specialization as the goal, of making more and more of the extraordinarily detailed research that takes place less and less relevant to having an impact on humanity. And one of the great attractive features of AKU is the direction from our chancellor that everything we do has to have impact. So we're not working on the origins of the university, or the origins of the universe, but we are working on things that in a 3 to 5 year timeline will and can have a direct impact. And I think, Asad, your hackathon with the education people on how to respond to emergency situations is a very, very good example of jumping out of healthcare in a traditional way and defining a broader agenda of well-being. So everybody needs to get involved. It doesn't mean we all need to become generalists, but even the subspecialists should spend part of their time thinking about how it becomes relevant in a human timescale. Over to you.
Great, thank you. I hope that kind of addresses Anil's question to some extent, but I guess we'll have to have a whole 1 hour dedicated to that question and the thoughts that are generated from that. But it's interesting that you mentioned generalists, Carl, because that kind of segues into, I think, yeah, Diana has asked a question. And Lauren, if you could address this. So Diana says, there are some people who will inevitably be better off deepening their expertise in one specific area such that they become among the world's top specialists. Other people who are on the specialist path may benefit from going agnostic or becoming experts in connecting the dots across areas of expertise. Do you think hackathons can help young people determine at an early stage their careers, which in their careers, which path might be better for them to pursue? Any advice for people serving as hackathon mentors? Because so Lauren, the hackathon just started yesterday. And that's why Diana is asking this question. We have a lot of excitement from students across AQ campuses.
A couple of comments. Again, a little bit to follow up on what Carl said, and I'll answer the first question as well. I think, again, I want to re-emphasize what Carl said, is innovation takes on many forms. A lot of times we think it's just this great, fantastic technological advancement. But again, innovation can be a very simple repurposing of something that's already known for a benefit for society. So then coming back to the question here about hackathons, I guess the issue is, and maybe I'll step back a little bit. When I was retiring from the University of Alberta as Vice President Research, we were in an environment where the government was saying, you must train people for jobs. Universities' function is to train people for jobs. And at my retirement, there were actually quite a few government officials there. And I took this opportunity to say, a university's role is not to train people for jobs. A university's role is to train people for life, because jobs change as we go along. And if you teach people to think, and you teach people to adapt, teach people to be risk takers, then you position them for life. And I think this comes back again with the hackathons. I don't think that you want to tell a student, this is what you should do or how you do it. Prepare them for being able to take on challenges that are coming up and be able to pivot again if something nicer comes up, something better comes up, something excites them. Because what excites you at 25 may not be what excites you at 55. So I think if you're well trained to be able to adopt new realities and adapt, then I think that's what will make your life fulfilling, and you will be able to benefit society, and in turn, you will be happier as well because you will feel fulfilled. Okay, not sure I answered the question, but I think that I would not want to buttonhole young people into one specific way or another of thinking.
No, I think that's great. That's a great. There's great wisdom in that, and as advice as well. And I think that, and so because I work with a lot of younger folks, tend to be in their 20s or early 30s, and I think that's what they need to realize as well, that jobs are going to change rapidly anyways. What they are good at doing, it's probably going to become irrelevant soon enough. So if they're able to pivot, that makes a lot of sense. So completely agree with you on that. I'd like to ask Carl, because we don't have any more comments or questions, but people can send us more comments and questions, and I can then ask our speakers. But Carl, do you think that entrepreneurship through startups can have a positive influence on healthcare students and professionals? And why would you say so, if you think that's the case?
For sure, the answer is yes. Otherwise, why would we do it within a university? Universities do many, many, many things, and we brag about many of those things we do. But at the end of the day, the most important thing we do is educate individuals. At my age, I can safely say younger people. And far and away, the single greatest impact of a university is through our graduates, our trainees, our postdoctoral fellows. So everything we do, whether it's a public university or a private university, has to proceed through the lens of how does it create a richer, more successful environment within which our students and trainees can work and learn and prosper, as Lorne put it, for the rest of their lives. So the question then is, how do we take a concept of innovation and how do we bring entrepreneurs into the university to the benefit of students? And my dream for AKU is that we evolve to the point where we routinely have opportunities for students, staff, and faculty, and it's important to bring staff into the discussion, to meet with successful entrepreneurs of many, many types from off campus. And in other settings, institutions will run evening events with small amounts of food and beverage to bring these successful entrepreneurs into close contact with students, a kind of matching process. They're not part of established curriculum. They're not part of for credit activity, although it can evolve in that direction. But it's simply an opportunity for students to talk to people who are further along in their career so they can look back and say, here's an opportunity I missed. Here's something I should have picked up. Here's something I did, and boy, has it had profound effect on my life. And again, to Lauren's point, it's not always just people patenting and creating companies and going through IPOs and things like that. It can be as simple and yet as powerful as someone developing a new and better way to connect community people to a social service NGO. It can be as simple as helping those in need better access service by making use of cell phone technology. So we're not there yet at AKU. You've run a couple of these things, sort of, on Stadium Road. We now have a campus, a vertical campus in Nairobi, so we should be able to move more rapidly in that direction. But that would be a dream of mine. And then the students will take it, pursue it, and run with it. And that magic that is a university environment will unfold. But it is a contact sport. We have pushed the limits of Zooming and other such devices. I think at the end of the day, personal contact is far and away the best way to inculcate this sense of adventure, the sense of excitement. Over to you.
Thank you. So just kind of like taking that point a bit further, right? So Lauren, failure is something that an entrepreneur should be familiar with, right? So, and there's a risk of failure with startups. What would you advise student entrepreneurs? Let's keep it focused on studentpreneurs, because with the Brain and Mind Institute, we are running this hackathon with the theme of student well-being or student mental health. So for studentpreneurs, what would be your advice? I mean, should they be entirely protecting themselves from failure, or embracing failure, failing fast and then pivoting? How do you look at failure in innovation and entrepreneurship for students particularly?
I don't think it's unique to students, but I think our society, our Western society, I should say, most Western societies, I don't know what it's like in Pakistan, because unfortunately that's one country I haven't visited, but we often look at failure as a disaster. And I think that that's not the case. You actually learn from your failures. And I had the privilege of visiting an entrepreneur in Israel. He started up 390 or 95 or whatever it is, doesn't matter when you get to that number, companies. And about over 100 of them failed. But nobody considered him a failure. Whereas, in fact, everybody thought that he was the greatest. That's why we had the privilege of meeting with him, because he was sort of Israel's poster child about innovation, and they're very much into innovation. So I think, again, it's a culture. We have to look at failure is not necessarily bad. Now, you don't want to fail 100% of the time all the time, but that means you have learned from things. But I think that you clearly learn from failure. So I wouldn't discourage them from failing, but I think, again, as I said earlier, make sure you find something that you're passionate about and have a solution, and have mentors. There's all kinds of ways to identify pathways to success, so that you're not out there alone by yourself, because that's when you're going to fail. But I think you've got to fail with a group around you. Then you know that you've really given it the best shot. If you're arrogant and think you can do everything yourself, I can guarantee you're going to fail.
Asad,
Yeah.
I'd like to take that word failure To be a failure, you have to have a preconceived notion of what is success. So failure is by definition, you didn't meet your standard of success. And very many times in the innovation business, success is defined in a Western financial context. But if we're going to broaden the concept of innovation to include, for example, people working in NGOs to find better ways to connect to client groups, then we probably need to get rid of the concept of failure and replace it with something like, well, this is an outcome. Is this outcome helping me attain my goal, whatever that goal may be? And if it's not, then maybe my goal is ill-defined, or maybe this outcome is better suited to a completely different goal. So working with students, especially in arts and humanities and social sciences, my advice to them is always, the outcome is just that, an outcome. What you do with the outcome, what is the next step on your way to the goal, even if it means redefining the goal, is more important than assigning the concept of success or failure. Failure is a pejorative, it's a competitive, it's a zero-sum concept, and I think it causes a lot of people a great deal of anxiety. And even in science, and Lorne is the expert here, how many times have spectacular discoveries come from the unexpected result at the bench that some might see as a failure given the current experimental design, but yet it turns into a runaway success when you take it in the direction that the evidence guides you. So, over to you.
Carl, if I could just add to that, a lot of times when my students would come to me after we've done an experiment, they'd come back and say, the experiment didn't work. Look at the results. And I say, what do you mean the experiment didn't work? Let's go through this. Yeah, the experiment worked. Our hypothesis was wrong. And so again, we learned from that and then we moved on further. And again, I think that, talking to young people, I think it's important to set goals. And again, where the failure comes is I think people reach for the sky. As Carl said, you look at an outcome. I look at again, as the progress. It's like the wanting to get up onto the roof of a house. Use a very simple example. You don't go from the ground to the roof in one step. You take a ladder and you take one rung at a time. And again, you have success on the first rung. So set your goals, that they're reach goals, but that you can actually reach them. And eventually you get to the roof of the house. If you're actually wanting an outcome to get onto the roof of the house, but you can't do it all in one step.
I'm kind of speechless because I'm trying to kind of reflect on all of this, and this is amazing. This is great because what we tend to think about failure is so limited, and what you're describing, Carl and Lorne, is much more nuanced approach to goal setting, if I may, and I think that's what we should be telling students and young innovators and entrepreneurs. It's about goal setting, and it's incremental from that perspective, that you make you're taking small steps. And yes, you might want to get to a moonshot, but it requires those small steps. And so then what is failure from that perspective? It's not really failure. Then you've learned from it and you've pivoted. And so, yeah, so I get it. And thank you so much for broadening that whole discussion. I think we've got a few more comments, questions. Anil has come back, Carl, and he's addressing you now again. So the provost brings up important points. Hold on, let me see if I can get this. Can you read the question? Because I can't scroll over here for some reason.
Yeah, I've got it. You want me to read it out?
Yes, please do.
Provost raises important questions of borderless learning that is not university-centric and the critical role of mentorship. So what is the esoteric aspect or specialized knowledge remit of universities that we must keep as we develop, evolve, disrupt, and MEDJACK curricular basis. So MEDJACK is now a verb, I guess. Well done. Well done. We're going to have to send you over to the language people for certification. It's a really good question. I will restrict my observation to AKU at this point. And in part, it's a response to the question I get many, many times. Why did I leave everything I was doing in one of the best funded public systems in North America to come to AKU, where every day we face issues of scarcity of resources? So our chancellor, when he founded the university, issued a 4-part, it's called guidance, I'd say direction. Everything we do has to be designed to have impact in the countries where we work. We have to do it at the highest possible level of quality. It has to be relevant to the problems that society is facing, and we have to make it accessible, regardless of financial means or location. So how does this circle back to Anil's question? To me, it means that the university has to be porous on its boundaries. It has to be a meritocracy for sure, but it has to be always infinitely flexible in our definition of what constitutes merit, so that we bring into AKU, in our programs, those people who are dedicated to the concept of pursuing education for the twin purpose of social fulfillment, building civil society, but also to improving the lives of the people that we seek to serve. So not every institution in the world can have this mandate. Not every institution in the world can have a very much externally focused view of the world. But it is AKU. We are in some of the most challenging environments that you can imagine, including Kabul, Afghanistan. So I'd say the remit to us as a university is to not allow ourselves to be siloed, to not permit ourselves to pull up the drawbridges in the face of difficult social situations, and to stay put. And the story is far from complete, but our hospital never, ever stopped serving the people of Kabul, even when we were visited by the new emerging government officials. So we stay put, we're in it for the long haul, and we remain faithful to the notion that our job is to improve society around us as we improve the lives of our faculty, staff, and students. So that's my core touchstone in being at AKU, and maybe it would work for other schools, but it certainly provides a strong central pillar for us. Back to you.
That's great. Thank you for that. And I keep thinking that Anil's questions are really interesting, and we need to have a separate session. So Anil, I'll reach out to you, and I think we should get into a discussion around these other additional things and additional points that you're raising. I'll get in touch with you. So Carl, there's another question for you that's been I've got a direct message, and so it's interesting to me. So I'm just going to read it out to you. So how, and this is specifically for you, Carl. So how do you address failures set by society or the universe, like failure to get a dream job, failure to get good grades, failure to get a visa, and so on?
Help me with the question. How do I personally deal with these things, or?
Yeah, I guess that's what it means, right? So it says, how do you address failures set by society? I guess that's what, like failure to get a dream job. So how do you personally perhaps then address something like that? How do you deal with failure to get a dream job, or failure to get the grades that you're hoping to get, failure to get a visa? So I guess it's a personal take.
Well, I guess I didn't expect that question today. So my background is one of 10 children, very poor, foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. I had 3 options when I headed towards university in the ancient period called 1974. I could go to the coal mines of Pennsylvania, the steel mills of Pittsburgh, or a public university. The US was still in the tail end of that afterglow following World War II, when it was the unchallenged master of everything. There were no shortages of funding, and education was affordable to someone like me. Although I did graduate with a lot of loans, it was manageable. So every step of the way, I was told by officials that my background was not well suited to higher education. My background was not suited to what I wanted to study. So I've just been told for a very long time, you're not qualified. And I always listened respectfully and moved on anyway. So I guess because of being, I should have said, a middle child of 10, which also means you're largely forgotten in certain settings, I've just always had this, well, that's your view. Let's see how far I can go. And I don't know that being told I was going to fail energized me. I don't think it was that fully thought out, but it certainly never stopped me. It was always in the category of, well, that's interesting. Let's see how far I can go. So when I work within AKU, to fast forward to the present, I was told the innovation thing would never work, that the deans would kill it. Well, I'd been a dean, and deans are complicated jobs. You protect your core faculty environment, but you also look for opportunities to further advance your activities within the domain of an academic unit. I was told AKU-wide curricula were not possible, and nursing is developing one. I was told we would never start arts and science, and we're starting it. So I guess to summarize it in the interest of time, I might see these forecasts of failure, forecasts of blockage, as critical points that cause me to think things through, but not become deterred. So it's a message that one or more people think you're headed into a hopeless direction, to which I respond, well, let me think it through. I'll watch for the hopeless dead end, but at the same time, I watch for increments of success. And I guess that's the way I've done it, personally and professionally. Maybe that makes sense. You tell me.
It makes a lot of sense. And thank you so much for sharing a personal story, putting yourself out there. And I hope that people on this call are really listening and use all of this information or to their advantage, because I think a lot of people struggle, and with the pandemic, I think a lot of young people are struggling even more about what to do and what's needed and so on and so forth. So I think these kinds of messages are really important. So Carl, thank you for that, because this is kind of like a take-home message that we do ask our panelists or our guest speakers to kind of leave us with some meaningful message. And I think you've kind of wrapped it up really well. I do have one question for Lauren. And Lauren, if this could be kind of, you could utilize this as your take-home message or wrap-up message. And the question is, do you think innovation is a privilege or a necessity? And why would you say so, if it's one or the other?
That's an interesting question. So I'm going to think about that a little bit. I think that clearly, I think it is a necessity if we want to continue to improve the life of humanity. and improve, again, as whether we said happiness or whatever term you want to use, because there are so many challenges that society has today. If we don't innovate, we'll continue to live with those challenges. I mean, it doesn't mean we're not going to create new challenges, but I think that's the sign of progress, is we address a challenge through innovation. So I think it's, and again, depending on how you define innovation, I'm defining it in the very broad sense of innovation, adopting new technologies, adapting things to doing things differently. So to me, I think that it's a necessity, but I also think it's a privilege to be part of the innovation ecosystem. Because again, you can see, or at least I do that personally, I happy to see that society can benefit from what I have done or what my colleagues have done or other people have done. So I think that, again, it's a privilege to be part of that excitement, but it also is a necessity for society to move forward. Don't know whether I've answered the question. Back to you.
No, that's great. Thank you, Lauren, for actually very succinctly putting it out there for our audience. We're coming up to the top of the hour, and I'm going to really, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much, Carl and Lauren, for participating in our webinar series. This is a request for all the new guests and colleagues and friends, actually, I can see on this call. So thank you so much for joining us. Every session, I think we tend to get a different lot. And the new folks or the new faces, quote unquote, that I'm seeing over here, they're here because of you and Lauren and Carl, actually, both of you. So thank you for agreeing to be part of our webinar series. And for the rest of you, reach out to us, medjack.net, read about the book. If you are interested in becoming a speaker for us or a panelist, you know how to catch hold of me or the team. And we are happy to kind of keep broadening this conversation. And Anil, I'm going to catch hold of you, and then we can have a webinar around your thoughts as well. Thank you once again. And it's good night from Karachi, and morning, evening, wherever the rest of you are. Thanks. Bye.